What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are going to continue our coverage over the X-Men. And guys, we're working our way up to Fatal Attractions. But first, we got to cover some story arcs that actually lead into that actual crossover. And so today, we're going to sit down and cover X-Men issue number 17, 18, and 19. Now, for me personally, this begins a huge change in the character of Colossus, but also putting Colossus through the ringer. Like, this is only part one of Colossus going through the ringer, because out of the story arc, there are going to be a few more story arcs where we're going to feel bad, very bad for Colossus. And you see what I mean as we go through today's video. And so getting into X-Men issue number 17, we actually pick up with Illyana, the younger sister to Colossus. Now, if you have seen my coverage over the X-Men as we covered the Mutant Massacre, X-Men Inferno, and so on, you would know that this character has gone through a lot. And the reason why I'm saying that, because when she first appeared in X-Men comics, she was a young girl, but then she was pulled away in limbo, and when she came back, she was a teenager. But then thanks to X-Men Inferno, well, she was turned back into a child again, a young child. Except this story arc is beginning the process of possibly saying like, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and turn her back into a teenager again, because she had cool power. She's a cool character. So let's try to get her back into that position. Either way, we do see her right now as a young child being very excited about the fact that her brother Colossus is going to pay them a visit. Except this visit might be somewhat sad. But we also see that somebody is actually watching her and the family very close. And this person right here is going to bring in a new concept in Marvel Comics, the whole idea of Russia, but also the character of Colossus. But now we pick up with two characters. That will be Darkstar and also Alexei Garnov. Now, these two characters are, well, of course, mutants who live in Russia. Now, over the years in Marvel Comics, the superhero name for the team in Russia would constantly change. So, for example, at first it was a Soviet Super Soldiers, and then it was Cyberforce, and then after that, the Winter Guard. But I want to say at this point in time, Marvel Comics, they were known as Cyberforce. Now, these two characters were given a task to go to a nearby town. And reason why, because every single person in that town seems to be under some kind of trance. They're not moving, they're not talking, they're just standing there in place, eyes wide open and just lost in some kind of trance. And so you have our heroes trying their best to figure out what in the world is going on. Now, that leads into both characters being attacked separately by our mysterious enemy, somebody who's a very powerful psychic, who's kind of going after their fears and even their sins or their regrets as a way to attack their minds, but to also get into their minds to shut them down. And so by the time we reach the end of this section, both Darkstar and also Alexei have been taken off the board completely. Now, we're going to see that Darkstar is going to be very important for the character of Iceman later on in this book, and I'll explain why. But now we pick up 3 days after the incident. We pick up with three characters discussing what had happened to Darkstar and also Alexei. Now, out of these three characters, only one of these characters is actually important, and his name is Alexei Vashin, so a different Alexei. Now, this Alexei and the other two guys, they work for different branches in Russia's government, and so they are discussing what's happening in that city at the moment. And the problem is right now, they have no idea who else they can send into the actual city to handle that problem, because they got word that Darkstar and the other Alexei had never came back, and that was 3 days ago. And so now they're wondering, what can they do to handle this situation? And so you have Alexei say, you know what? I have the perfect guy who would not mind going into that actual city. I'll call in Omega Red. But now we have to jump over to the X-Men. Now, because this book does take place right after the Executioner's Song, you don't really have the initial team of this book. And what I mean is that when it came to Jim Lee and Chris Claremont, when they had launched the X-Men book in 1991, we had two X-Men teams, Gold Team and Blue Team. Now, Gold Team was being led by Storm, and Blue Team being led by Cyclops. But we see right now, we have a small mixture of Gold Team and Blue Team here because you have Cyclops, you have Wolverine, you have Psylocke, but you also have Colossus and Iceman who are usually on Storm's team. Now, they're on their way over to Colossus' parents' home. Now, for Colossus, he has to inform his parents that his brother they thought had died many years ago was actually alive, but now he is dead for sure because he had committed suicide a couple story arcs ago. Now, at the same time, we're also getting reminded that Cyclops is still kind of figuring out what went wrong when it came to Strife and also Cable. He wants to know the actual truth of those characters, but at the same time, he's also thinking about Psylocke because he wants her so bad. But at the same time, he's with Jean Grey still. And so once you have our heroes arrive, you have our heroes being very happy to see Colossus being able to reunite with his family. Now, unfortunately, this happy moment gets ruined very quickly because now Colossus has to tell his parents that their older son that they had thought died many years ago was actually alive is now dead now because he had committed suicide. And so while you have Colossus trying to talk to his family, we see the same guy we saw earlier who was watching Ileana watching the entire family and then calls to the colonel and says, hey, my name is Flag Watch 133 and this is going to be really important for the later chapters. Now, we also get an update on the character Rogue. You see, for Rogue, back in the Executioner's Song, she got severely injured to the point where she's technically blind. Not permanently blind, but like it's going to take a while for her eyesight to actually return. And so we pick up with her and Gambit. Now, this is Gambit trying to build that bond with her, but at the same time also trying to show her that she needs to trust the other members of the X-Men now even more because, well, she needs help moving around the mansion or just flying around the mansion as well. But at the same time, still Gambit trying to be Gambit, trying to get Rogue to fall in love with him. Now, they're being watched by Charles Xavier, and he realized that Gambit does love Rogue, but he's afraid to fall in love with her. But he wants her to fall in love with him. Now, while you have Charles watching them, you then have Beast walk into the room. And Beast want to sit down and talk to Charles about something, but then they are interrupted by, well, Storm, Warpath, and also Cannonball. Now, Cannonball is the leader of X-Force and Warpath is part of X-Force. Now, when it comes to these two characters and the rest of X-Force, they're kind of on house arrest. You see, in the early days of X-Force, they were that team being led by Cable who were not technically afraid to cross the line, except when they did cross those lines, well, they were wanted by the law. And so they're now kind of being put on house arrest and being watched over by Charles Xavier and the rest of the X-Men. But X-Force got word that somebody is killing off the Hellions, but also the White Queen, Emma Frost, is currently in a coma. And so for Cannonball, who is the leader of X-Force, but also he was part of New Mutants, and that team there had fought against, well, the Hellions over the years, he's kind of like, listen, even though I hated those guys, someone's out there killing them off, and I need to know why. And also the White Queen's in the coma. And so it's Charles saying, you're under house arrest, but I'll play the role of acting like I had no idea that you left the grounds to figure out what's going on with the White Queen and the Hellions. But now we have to jump over to Tokyo. And the reason why, because we're being introduced to another new character, and this character is Kawanin. Now, this begins one of the most difficult concepts ever in Marvel Comics. Not really difficult, just It was a concept that just ran its course way too long, and Marvel only fixed it in the 2010s. And for me personally, that was just way too long a concept to go on when it comes to the character known as Psylocke. And this is Kawanin. And Kawanin is the woman who's currently in the body of Psylocke. Let me explain. You see, in the 1980s, when you had Psylocke join the X-Men, she was a purple-haired character, Caucasian character, really a British character, who joined the X-Men. But then in the middle of the Acts of Vengeance storyline, Psylocke was kidnapped by the Hand and put in a different body, a body of a young Asian woman. And so the question was, what happened to the old body of Psylocke? Well, now we see that her body is being used by somebody else, a character known as Quanin, who's now ready to find Psylocke and to hopefully get her body back. Now, we do get a couple of pages where we see Colossus doing some farm work, but not trying to use his powers. Wolverine's kind of wondering, like, hey, Colossus, you have the ability to turn into metal and use your super strength to finish jobs very easily. Why are you not doing that? And for Colossus, it's the idea that sometimes he just want to feel like a regular human being and not use his powers at all to finish certain tasks around the actual farm. We're also getting a couple more pages where we see Cyclops still trying to figure out like what is the whole big idea behind Cable and also Strife. Now when he does wake up and try to go in the shower, well, Psylocke is getting out of the shower. And so it's another moment where it's kind of like, will Cyclops actually cheat on Jean Grey to just be with Psylocke? And you have Iceman and Jubilee being able to hang out with Ileana and also with her parents in the kitchen. Now, while they're hanging out, this leads into, well, the big idea of something going to happen down the road for Ileana. Because by the next page, we jump back over to the other Alexei, who's now telling us that after they had sent Omega Red into that city, he had also disappeared as well. Nobody knows what exactly went down in that city when it came to Omega Red. But apparently, their next idea is to use Ileana. That apparently Ileana is the perfect thing they can use to figure out what's happening in that city. Now, for Alexei, he does not want to use her at all. And the reason why, because she's a young girl. But then he said, hey, listen, Flag Watch 133 just called in, and apparently her brother and his friends had just arrived. And so now it's the X-Men that be sent in into the city to figure out what exactly is going on there. And so as we dive into X-Men issue number 18, we actually pick up with Omega Red. Now, this is being used as a way to explain what happened to Omega Red when he had arrived into the city. Well, we kind of find out that he was also attacked by this psychic character. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the actual name of this character, and his name is Soul Skinner. Now, for me, that is a cool name, and unfortunately, this is the only story arc we're ever going to see this character unless Marvel says, you know what? Let's go ahead and use that character again. But for right now, this is the only story arc he does appear. Now, Soul Skinner, gonna learn more about the character down the road later on in this video, but we do know that he is a mutant who's able to tap into your mind and make you feel all the fear and the worst times of your lives all at once, over and over again. And apparently, he is the reason why every single person inside the city is just completely frozen, not moving, not talking, just staring out into the ocean because right now they're frozen in time in their minds, just going through all their fears, but also their worst moments in their lives as well. And so for Omega Red, he feels like with him being a primal force, he should be able to take down the Soul Skinner and get the job done. The problem is, even though he is physically strong, he is not mentally strong. The Soul Skinner is that powerful when it comes to his psychic abilities that he was able to shut down the mind of Omega Red and then have Omega Red relive all the worst moments of his life, to go through all his fears. And so now we know that Omega Red had also failed in a matter of like maybe minutes as he entered the city to help out the people in that city. But now we have to jump back over to the X-Men, where we do see that Alexei was able to get the help of the X-Men. Now, this is where the X-Men begin to learn the actual secrets of the government of Russia. And what I mean is that you have Alexei say, listen, we have somebody out there watching over a certain mutant for 14 years. Of course, they are talking about Soul Skinner, but something happened to their agent. But on top of that, something has happened to that mutant as well. Now, for Colossus, this kind of builds the whole idea that the government has a lot of secrets involving the mutant race. And sometimes they use the power they have as a government to force people to do things, but lie to folks saying, like, hey, you're actually helping us out. But in reality, you're helping us cover our tracks. So because this was something that could have been avoided. And you see what I mean as we go into the later chapters. Now, you do have Iceman find out that Darkstar was one of the three characters who went into the city but had disappeared. Now, for Iceman and Darkstar, they had a small moment in time where they were actually in love. And the reason why, because Iceman had joined a team called the Champions. I want to say the 1970s going to the 80s. The Champions weren't really a popular team, but she was there for a brief moment. It kind of had a sweet moment with Iceman. Then she left the team and he kind of like felt really heartbroken. But to hear that maybe she's in danger, he's more down with the idea of going into the city to hopefully find her and actually save her. And so you do have our heroes being able to arrive into that small town. Now, thanks to Alexei, he does tell us that because you had the government watching all the different mutants across Russia, like this one, they know that he is a powerful psychic mutant. And so they have to go in with their A game because this is a powerful mutant who would have the ability to just shut down the entire team of the X-Men, but also Alexei. Now, you do have our heroes being able to find Darkstar and also the other Alexei, but then they're confronted by Omega Red. And Omega Red on himself right now, like, yes, he wants to kill off the X-Men, but this is Omega Red trying to kill off the X-Men for the Soul Skinner, not for himself. Now, we also see that other government officials are actually talking about the idea of still using the red flag. Of course, they are talking about Ileana. But right now, it's kind of like, let's use her only as a backup plan. And even though they hate the idea that she's a small girl and they want to kill her off to stop what's happening in that city, at the same time, they don't have a choice right now because they are afraid of Soul Skinner. They want to make sure the Soul Skinner does not get out of control and try to go out of the actual city. Now, we do see that Masuo is there, and we're getting reminded that Omega Red currently works for Masuo, but he was kind of given over to Russia to kind of help out with the situation. But now he's hearing that maybe he may not get Omega Red back if things continue to go south. Now, we have to jump back over to Kawanin. And the reason why, because like I said earlier, she's currently in the body of Psylocke, of course, Bessie Braddock, but she's currently being controlled by a crime lord known as, and I'm going to mispronounce the name, but Nyorian. Now, Nyorian is a huge crime lord in Tokyo, and apparently a huge rival of the Hand as well. But either way, they have plans to go after Psylocke, because apparently she wants to kill her off. Kawanin does. And so getting back over to the X-Men, we see the X-Men fighting against Omega Red. Now, they're learning that Omega Red is not Omega Red. Like, it's him, but he's being controlled by the Soul Skinner. Now, you have Psylocke trying to use her knife, her psychic knife, on the mind of Omega Red to hopefully free him, but to also stop him from attacking them. But the problem is Soul Skinner is a more powerful psychic than Psylocke is. So her knife does nothing at all to Omega Red. Instead, it kind of gives Soul Skinner the ability to attack her mind so, well, easily. And so you now have Psylocke being taken off the board. Now you have Wolverine, Jubilee, Iceman, and Cyclops trying their best as well to fight against Soul Skinner. But the problem is that, again, he's just too powerful. And we actually see that he continues the trend to bring out your worst fears, but also the worst moments of your life. Because you have Cyclops being forced to relive all the worst times of his life, like the idea of him and Havoc being pushed out of a plane because their parents were being taken away by some aliens. Or you have Cyclops reliving the whole idea of sending his baby into the future. Or what is the big secret behind Strife and also Cable? By the end of this section, though, we do see that most of the X-Men have been taken out. And the reason why I say most is because Colossus and also Alexei were able to get away because they realized they do not stand a chance at all going up against, well, Soul Skinner. And so we see Colossus and also Alexei being able to get away from Soul Skinner, but they do find a room full of children. Now, this is establishing that when it comes to the children, the powers of the Soul Skinner does not work on them. Now, for Colossus, this is great. For Alexei, it's also great. But the problem is for Alexei is that there are people in the Russian government who are going to learn about this, which means that they're going to use Red Flag 133 against Soul Skinner because she is a child. His powers won't work on her at all. And again, Red Flag 133 is Illyana, the small sister to Colossus. And so it's now kind of saying like, hey, they're going to use his sister against Soul Skinner, but at the same time, they need her to have her mutant ability. Because when it came to Illyana Magic, when she was a young girl, they had no idea she was a mutant or what her powers was. But when she left to Limbo and came back, she was a teenager and she had a mutant ability, being able to teleport by using wormholes. Now, the problem was, though, is that when she was turned back into a child, it kind of seems like her powers are kind of locked away again until she'll be a teenager again and they'll manifest once again. And the question is right now, how are you going to be able to bring the powers out of a young girl if those powers are not truly going to activate until she is a teenager? Either way, we actually see a group of soldiers, or really government agents, go into the home of Colossus, killing off his parents. They grab Liana and say, let's go. We got to use you to save people's lives in this country. So now Colossus has lost his parents. He has no idea that his mom and dad have been officially killed off. But getting back over to Colossus and also Alexei, you have Colossus find out that the government is planning on using Illyana's to basically bring down Soul Skinner. But you have Colossus say, how can you do that, though? Because her powers are locked away until she turns into a teenager. And so you have Alexei tell Colossus, like, hey, the government actually has a way to accelerate her growth, meaning that they're going to age her up so that her powers can come back and then she can use her powers to get rid of Soul Skinner. And so for Colossus, he is technically finding out that the government had grabbed his sister and they are planning on using her to save this small town full of people. Now, this is where we actually dive into the origin of the Soul Skinner, because we do learn that apparently he was just your average dude. Like, he was a mutant, but he had a family. But the problem was his daughter was dying. Now, remember, he is a powerful psychic. And so his main goal was to go into her mind to actually ease her pain. But the problem was, though, when he had entered her mind, he only felt what she was feeling when it comes to the idea of dying. And so once he realized what she was going through, the idea of dying, he then found out that his wife was actually a government agent. Now remember, when it comes to Russia, they had different people assigned to watch different mutants across Russia. And apparently his wife was his watcher. So for 14 years, she had watched him. But also, she got married to him. She had a daughter with him. But then their daughter died. And so he got very upset about the fact that with her being in the government, she may have the ability to find somebody in the government who could have possibly saved the life of their daughter. And because she did not do that, he went ahead and killed her by making her relive all the worst moments of her life and all her fears. And that began his path of doing everything to other people in that city. So the reason why he's going around just making everybody feel bad for what they have done in their past is because what his wife did to him. But either way, he tells Omega Red, find Colossus, find Alexei, bring them here, or go ahead and kill them. Either way, we got to stop them. Now, I want to jump back over to Colossus and also Alexei because they do get into an actual argument and an actual battle as well. Because for Alexei, he does explain to Colossus that why they need the powers of, well, Ileana back because she has the ability to teleport. And so they're kind of hoping to save the entire city of people by using her powers to, basically get rid of the Soul Skinner. But for Colossus, he's kind of like, listen, thanks to you guys, Russia, the government, I already lost my brother when you had twisted his mind. And now you are talking about the idea of possibly losing my sister because even though this process has the ability to age up Ileana, there's still a huge chance that she could actually die through the entire process. And for Colossus, he would hate the idea of losing his sister. But for Alexei, it's kind of like, listen, does your sister's life matter more than an entire city full of people? Like, there are hundreds and hundreds of people who right now need our help, and you're putting their souls underneath your own sister. But for Colossus, it's kind of like, yeah, I would do anything to protect my sister. I will sacrifice everything to protect my sister. Now, you do have Colossus trying his best to fight his way over to his sister, but let's not forget that for Colossus, he has no idea that the government has killed off his family so that they would be able to retrieve his sister. And so once you have Alexei play the whole card of like, you are a student of Charles Xavier. You understand what it's like to battle against evil mutants. And here we are again with another evil mutant. And so for a brief moment, it does seem like Colossus is actually considering allowing the government to use his sister. But then you have Soul Skinner arrive, and he shows Colossus what's really going on inside the mind of Alexei. And that is the moment you have Colossus find out that his parents have been killed off. But now we have to jump back over to Rogue and Gambit. Now, when we do, we actually see the two characters right now still hanging out. But while they're hanging out, we get the idea that there's something going on with Beast. It really is more of the idea that the younger X-Men like Gambit, Rogue, and possibly like Jubilee, not possibly, she is really young, but the younger X-Men who are not the original X-Men are so carefree. But for Beast, as he gets older, he becomes more concerned about the actual future for the mutant race, it seems. And you have Jean Grey realize that there's something going on in the mind of Beast, and of course, she needs to talk to him. And so you have the two characters decide to talk to one another about his problem. But we got to move back on over to Colossus. But getting back over to Colossus, we have to remember that this man just found out that his parents have been killed off. And so the only person left in his family alive right now is his sister. And so for Colossus, he's kind of like, no, I'm killing every single person who was responsible for the death of my family. Now, you also have Soul Skinner trying to use the grief and pain of Colossus to get into his mind. But the whole idea of the grief and the pain that Colossus is going through, but also the idea that he almost used his own sister to stop Soul Skinner, mess with the mind of Soul Skinner because, again, his daughter died. And when his daughter died, that began the whole idea of Soul Skinner bringing pain to other people inside this city. And so basically what's happening at the moment is that is Soul Skinner now beginning to realize that Colossus is going to do the same thing that Soul Skinner did many years ago when it came to his daughter. Now, here's the catch. You see, for Soul Skinner, he's kind of like, listen, I got to make sure they cannot use Ileana for any other purpose at all down the road. And so he turns on the machine. Now remember, this machine may be able to age her up, but at the same time, there's still a possibility it could kill her off. Now, you do have Colossus being able to tell Psylocke to take all the innocent of all the young children that he found earlier and use that power against the mind of Soul Skinner. And all of that innocence basically shuts down the mind of Soul Skinner, moving him off the board. Now, you do have Alexei go ahead and shoot Soul Skinner in the head to kill him off, and that is why we don't ever see him again down the road in later books when it comes to X-Men comics. Now, really, the book kind of ends on a good note. Well, not really a good note because Colossus did lose his whole entire family except for Ileana. But you do have Colossus being able to rip open the machine that was about to age up Ileana into a teenager, saving her life at the very last second. Now, after him doing that, you then have Wolverine appear. And with Wolverine appearing, he says Omega Red had once again disappeared, which means that right after Soul Skinner had lost control of the mind of Omega Red, he dipped out. And so we're kind of left to wonder what is next for our heroes in the next story arc that we are going to cover. But this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.